Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp and I'm the Chief Digital Manager for DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining today's DATAVERSITY webinar, The Importance of MDM, Eternal Management of the Data Mine. It is the latest installment of a monthly webinar series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just click the chat icon in the upper right-hand corner for that feature. For questions, we'll be collecting them via the Q&A in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or if you'd like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using hashtag DataEd to answer the most commonly asked questions. As always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link to the recording of this session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now let me introduce to you our speaker for today. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. In fact, he'll be at Enterprise Data World here the first week of April. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 8 books. Is it 9 yet, Peter? Are we published yet?
Yes. We're not quite there, but we'll be out soon.
So Peter is experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. He often appears at conferences and is constantly traveling. So, Peter, hello and welcome.
Thank you, Shannon. On my way out of this awful snowstorm here in the Northeast and headed for Florida. So just coincident timing, and I'll tell you there probably won't be any sunshine down there either for you. So don't feel jealous, right? So let's get started today with our sort of standard creed here, which is that as data managers, we believe that data is the most powerful yet underutilized and poorly managed organizational data asset. Data is the only asset that we have that is not depletable in nature, it's not degradable, it is durable, in fact, in nature. And so when you compare data assets to other types of assets, the data assets really win in that overall competition of utility to organizations. A lot of people will say it's the new oil. I've got a chapter in the new book that says it's not the new oil. By the way, Shannon, I don't just say you sound a little fuzzy, so if I get fuzzy or something like that, let me know. I've got my message thing on here, so hopefully that won't happen like it did last time.
Will do.
But anyway, people say data is the new oil, and I think that's really the wrong way to think about it because oil is a production function. So I've got a chapter in the new book called Data is Not the New Oil and why you shouldn't think about it that way. But you can think about it as data is the new soil. Plant something in it and good stuff will grow. If you want to call it data is the new bacon, that's okay too. It's whatever we need to do to get people to pay attention to it, to help collectively us help strengthen our organizational data management capabilities to provide solutions that are appropriate to meet the organization where it is on its maturity journey and to build lasting partnerships between business and IT. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll do my usual data management overview, should take 3 minutes or so, and then we'll dive into the subject material, which is what is reference and MDM as buzzwords go. Why are they important? And then what are the building blocks that we need in order to put them in place? And then we'll look at some best principles around that, and then of course we get to the Q&A, which is always the fun part of how to do this. So let's dive in, take a look at what we're talking about from data management as a perspective all the way around. The idea here is, of course, that we don't really have a good idea of what data management is. Most people think of it as what happens between when data is acquired and when data is used. And those are important phases in the life cycle on that, the sources and the uses. And talking about what goes on in between them, we have some engineering components, some storage components, and some data delivery components. And we then understand the need to govern them. So it's a good idea, and that tells us we need specialized skills. But it really is a little better than that, because even this model doesn't depict what I was trying to get at with the data is the new oil, which is that oil you can't reuse, and data, of course, is more valuable the more you use it assuming that you know what you're doing with it in here. So we're looking for ways of describing this. This reuse picture is one that we've come up with. I have another one that's kind of like this, but I put a little bit more in the center here on the resources angle. Remember, all of these pictures are for you guys to use. So if you want to use the actual slides, give me a shout, but Shannon will send these things out to you at the end of the 2 days it would take to do the post-processing on this, as we call it, and get that done. But that really, all of these things are about bringing data to using, whether it's a customer, whether it's a internal person, all sorts of different things that we need to help out with on all of this. So I moved from that to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which most of you remember from high school. Basically, you're on the bottom level where you start. If you have food, clothing, and shelter needs that are unmet, you can't be safe by definition. And of course, if you aren't safe, you can't get to loving and belonging, which then gets you to esteem and self-actualization. And what the heck does this have to do with data? Well, turns out data is an awful lot like that. We have the golden triangle of data management practices. MDM is one of them that we've got in there, data mining, big data analytics. The only thing that's changed over 33 years of doing this is the words that are actually in the triangle. But that's just an understanding that this is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of dealing with data, and that the lower level foundational practices are equally as important. We talk about 5 of them. We're going to do those in another session that'll be in May with our good friend Melanie on this, and talk about them in a little bit more specificity. But if you don't have the foundational practices, everything else that you try to do is harder. In fact, if you think about it, the thing that are in the golden triangle, the thing that people write about, is technology focused. And what we really want to emphasize here is a capabilities focus on all of these things. Because in spite of hearing this, people still say, yeah, I know, but the boss wants it by Friday. Can you do it faster? And the answer is yes, you can do it without doing the foundational practices, but it will take longer, cost more, deliver less, and present greater risk to the organization than if you do it the proper way. Again, these are our 5 practice areas. We've got another whole webinar coming up on those in May, but they're really about managing the data coherently, making sure there's a professional class of individuals doing the work for them, making sure the data is in fact fit for purpose, and that you're doing it with the right tools and with the right processes around those tools. All of this needs some supporting practices in order to take it into place. And one of the reasons that this is relatively new is because we've only been doing this as a formalized discipline since the year 2009 as far as the DAMA wheel goes. Now, people have been doing data management, but informally, it really has only been around for 100, maybe 150 years if you really want to stretch it. So it's okay for us to be immature. It's not okay for us to not do the things that we need to do. What we're doing in this webinar then is focusing on those specifics right there at the bottom right-hand corner, reference and master data. So let's dive in and take a look at that. This is our overall plan that we're going to take a look at, which is from the DMBOK, which talks about the goals, the inputs, the activities or processes that are involved in it, and the outputs that come out of it, along with a series of tools and technologies. Now, I'm going to tell you a story here on the whole process here to get us into reference and MDM. And this is really the reason that Shannon asked us to put this particular webinar together, because we see this pattern happen a lot. Many people will buy an MDM solution, or worse still, an MDM strategy, which is a problem all the way around. We'll get to that in a little bit on this. But that at the end of a year, we end up with people being confused as to what the MDM is doing. The business didn't know how to use the MDM, and I would actually hear people walking around the organization saying things like, well, I didn't know where else to stick the data, so I stuck it in the MDM. Now, you'll notice I had a one-legged stool there. The one-legged stool, of course, fell over, because a one-legged stool is not really sustainable from an architectural perspective, and neither is putting in an MDM tool. There's a good deal of analysis and work that the organization actually needs to do in order to do this. So back to our story here, when people got confused about that, there was general agreement that they needed to restart the effort. And what they did when they did a root cause analysis was that they discovered by a consensus that the system of MDM had poor quality data in it. And of course, that didn't help them any, so the response was, good, get busy and fix all that data, get data qualitying, if you will. That's very bad English in there. But they were less experienced with, in this case, the data quality pieces than they were with the MDM. So I put another leg up on the stool there to give us the people and the technologies pieces of it, but we really don't have the right processes around it. Because with immature practices, with a strictly tool-focused and buying things like, you know, magic data quality tools that will get us through everything, you know, it gets us where we need to get to, but not in a manner that's smooth in order to do this. So let's go back and talk about what is master data management anyway. And by the way, if you talk about MDM outside of certain places, they'll think it's mobile device management. So we do have to watch our acronyms. Gartner has a great definition for this. They hold that MDM is a discipline, and that makes good sense. It should not be thought of as strictly a technology, but as that three-legged stool of people, process, and technologies, where business, the IT organization work together to ensure the uniformity, accuracy, semantic persistence, stewardship, and accountability of the enterprise's official shared master data. And what that means is these things are sold as a solution, but what are the official consistent set of identifiers? And if you look at that, identifiers for most organizations, whether you're in the public sector or private sector, include parties, which are people, prospects, citizens, employees, there's lots of names there. By the way, I put LEI up there as well, Legal Entity Identifier, which is something that Linda Powell and I have talked about quite a bit. Linda is actually the co-author of that standard, and she and I will be giving a talk at Enterprise Data World at the beginning of next month anyway, on Wednesday. So back to our thing here, identifiers, parties, places, and things. If we don't have master lists of those things, we probably aren't doing a good job in data. In fact, the average organization has their customer data stored in 17 different databases. So everybody who's listening, if you can count less than 17 places where this is stored, you are above average. On the other hand, you're not where you'd like to be. These master data items provide the context for the transactions. They're from the term master file. And if you think about it, the old way we used to do processing was that we would take the old bank file that had my balance of $100 as the old master file, and I would take a transaction, $10 out for lunch. So the update program would give me a new master file with my new balance of $90 if I haven't put any money into it, and I didn't overdraw my checking account. If I overdo the checking account, you get that message there of the error message and say, oops, you've made an oopsie and the bank wants to talk to you. So hopefully that gives you an idea. It's a discipline as opposed to a technology. Very important distinction in there. We talk about this in the context of a golden version. Now, golden version, when we're talking about software, is the software that you release. It's the one that used to be put on the CDs. It's now the one that you download. Of course, now that we download, we don't have to have quite as golden. We have Microsoft doing in-stream updates to us on a regular basis. All of which is okay, but there's still only one master copy of Windows 10, whatever the current version is. We also talk about gold recordings as well. It's not quite as consistent in there, but you know, the gold record is the one from which all the other records are pressed. So in data management, it's the idea of representing the correct answer to a specific business question. What we're looking specifically for is planning, implementation, and control activities that ensure consistency with a golden version of the contextual data values. Now, the key here for this is to make sure that it's not just the technology, but it's all the things that wrapped around the technology. And this is why most MDM efforts have failed so far. I'll get to that in just a little bit. Let's look at reference data as well, because it's a related and more narrow version of the same thing. What the reference data means is that it's control over what we call the domain values. That's probably not very helpful, and if you go to explain domain values to a business person, that's going to be not useful at all. So let's talk instead about the vocabularies that the organization is going to have. Control over standardized terms, code values, unique identifiers, et cetera, et cetera. The business definitions around these. That gives us consistent shared use of this reference data in order to specifically identify and categorize the data. Let's look at a specific example here now. Reference data may be something like the two-letter USPS state codes. The abbreviation, my own, is Virginia. Another one might be the one above it, the order status, something that is new, in progress, closed, or canceled. If those are the allowable values for an order, then an order can't be in between. Right? It is either going to be new, in progress, closed, or canceled. By the way, these are not the only values that are having, but this is controlling, of course, what is going on. If your organization allows a order status to be something other than these and your reference data doesn't permit it, it will be very hard for people to actually do the work that they need to do because the computing systems will not help them around this. So look at the bottom here. It's a fairly common error for this sort of thing, but if I'm looking to look at identifying country codes in there, US is perfectly fine for the United States, but we probably don't want to put UK for the United Kingdom because the definition for the official abbreviation for it is Great Britain. So if you did a query looking for all of your United Kingdom customers, but you were asking for UK instead of GB, that would not give you the answer that you want. Again, you can see here how this is, relatively speaking, a subset of the master data that we're looking at in particular. So that's reference data. Master data then allows this consistent set of values across the organization so that we can take a look at what's actually happening. Again, it's the data about the business, but not limited to those predefined values. We have a lot of them that we can put up. Again, the format, allowable parties, locations, right? And again, this all comes from that term master file. So let's look at a specific definition here, a specific example. If we look at reference data, the fact that this organization maintains 9 gender codes, those gender codes are the reference data that is associated with this particular environment. By the way, this was an example from a Canadian company that I worked with a couple of years back when, at the time, in Canada, it was mandatory to maintain these 9 codes. You absolutely had to have a code in there that said one of the things you can have as a descriptor of a person from a reference data perspective is will not tell. And if you do not have that code in there, you're in violation of Canadian law. So if you look now, I was doing this lecture last night in my class and somebody looked it up on the internet. I used to think that Facebook had 63 gender codes, but it turns out there are over 70 now. So the world gets more complicated as we get older, right? If we contrast that with master data, the reference data is the fact that we maintain 9 gender codes and that they are mutually exclusive. You can be not male and female in this particular taxonomy here, right? There may be others that you could be, but this one is not. I'm sure within the 73 versions of Facebook codes, there's something in there that allows you to do both. But master data here now is the idea that the gender of your customer, Pat, might be important. Pat, of course, being a gender-neutral name, you wouldn't want to say Mr. Pat as opposed to Mrs. Pat or Miss Pat, depending on how that particular person is like. So, again, our reference data is a subset of master data, but they both work the same way. Reference data is what are the allowable values that are allowed to take. Again, for gender, one of these 9, right? Master data then is about the fact that you're going to maintain gender information on your customers and that these specific customers have these specific gender values. Both of these provide the context for the transaction data. Were we live, I'd say, do we have any questions? But we can't do that right now, so we're going to move on, talk about why this stuff is important. And the basic facts of it are pretty straightforward. Some of your data is more important than others. And if we get the important stuff right, it'll be easier to put the other things together. But let's look at it in a little bit more systematic fashion. When we look at poor quality reference data, it is a problem for most major financial institutions. They have homegrown solutions, and that risk management is being seen as quite an important business driver. In spite of all of this, 31% of the organizations still manage their data locally, meaning they're not employing this type of systematic process. And that makes it very, very difficult to come back in and respond to regulatory requirements. So many of them are trying to get better about this, but the process of getting better in most people's minds is to buy an MDM solution. Now, I'm not telling you not to buy an MDM solution, but it's probably not the place that you want to start. Let's take a look instead and say, what do we really need to have happen? And the idea is we need to put a combination of things in place. I have never seen a master data exercise work successfully unless it was also accompanied by data governance and data quality. That's not to say that those are the only things that we need to have in order to do this, but this is the minimum set that needs to occur in here. And the idea is that data governance makes the case and is responsible for data quality, because after all, if you have a brand new set of data and you fill it up with rubbish, it's not going to seem like the system works very well to the users. Data quality then is a necessary insufficient prerequisite for success in that area, and that the master data capabilities help constrain the data governance effectiveness in that process. Let me give you an example that we did for one of the banks that we were working with. They had what they called systems of record, but they really were the same thing as these master data stacks that we talk about in here. This was the idea that we would find specific identifiable information for me as a customer at the bank. And this bank had a goal of trying to become more friendly with their customers. They realized they had some customers that they hadn't talked to in 150 years. That sink in for just a quick second on that. So they decided to start out a outreach effort, and what they did is they looked at their master data and said, we can pull out this stuff by day, week, month, et cetera, in terms of when we've last contacted these individuals with respect to these master data items. Now, I'm reading this in translation for you. There are an awful lot of other details that go along with this, but let's try to see how that works. So if I pull that information into a repository of some sort, when a customer comes in through one of our various channels, whether it's the web, the mobile app, or actually walking into a branch office, for some reason all the branches of the banks these days are going to be coffee houses before too long. I'm not sure exactly why, but apparently it appeals to the millennials, so that's fine. Anyway, when they walk in, they can have this thing called a latency check, which is when was the last time we actually spoke to that individual. Because if we haven't seen them for maybe 2 years, we might want to do a double check to make sure we've got the right email address for them. So we can then put in place this customer contact option where we can then address the various pieces that are coming in and do updating whatever information needs to be updated here. So they're using the master data to drive forward this process of becoming more friendly, more connected, more sticky with their customers that they have in the environment here. They could also then bring in external address processing, and because they have their data oriented in this fashion, they don't have to go out and find all of the various places where this needs to be updated. They have a very simple process in order to do this. Let me show you another example, which is one that we were working on for an organization. And the piece at the center here where it says metadata practices, notice that looks a whole lot like our data management practices we had a few slides back. That's okay, because metadata is really data management. We're just using the word metadata as a gerund instead of as an adjective. The idea here is that the knowledge management practices of this organization were routinely fed into this metadata practice that allowed people to go in and find some of the useful information updating master data management practices. So this actually could be an alternative to that first slide that I just showed you a second ago, the solution framework slide, indicating in this case that rather than having an active process, we might want to have a passive process going through and doing some background work and trying to simply do things like scan Google and things like that to come up with what they were attempting to pull together, which is better quality information about their respective customers. Again, notice also that I've said specifically that you need to have data quality in this as well in order to do a good job, because if you're not working from a continuous improvement process, it can be very, very complex. Let me look even more complex piece on this, which simply shows the governance, the quality, and the master data, looking at it from both an operational data perspective as well as on the top half, what are the processes that are interacting with all of these. All of this makes perfectly good sense. By the way, I don't expect you to get everything out of this diagram just for starters, but just so that you can see it in context. But this is, of course, how we'd like the world to be. The problem is the world is more looking like this. We've really, in most organizations, paved the cow path for a series of very good reasons. Each one of these data stores then has its own master data with it, which is how you get to 17 being the average number of places where customer information is stored around the organization. And better still, when we ask for integration to occur in this, we now start to have all of these fun little red lines where people are trying to develop one-time interfaces between System 1 and System 2, and System 2 and System 3, et cetera, et cetera. You can see this is a very inefficient way to go about the process. Let me take you to another aspect of this, which is the vocabulary aspect that I referenced earlier when I was talking about reference data. I had an organization that we were working with at one point in time that was purchasing a very large accounting package, and this accounting package was a very good accounting package, but from the perspective of the customer, they did have an issue with it. Every time the system recorded a transfer of a liquid from one container to another container, it wrote it up as a retail sale. That may be okay if you're actually doing all of those as retail sales. However, this company recorded transfers to trucks, to tanks, to boats, and to flying tanks. And in which case, none of those transfers were, in fact, retail sales. Now, the option that they were faced with was we could either modify the accounting package to work better with our business practices, and that is an option that was definitely considered. However, they found that to be expensive based on the practice that other organizations had had with ERPs. They were looking at a maintenance bill of millions per annual cycle on this, and that just didn't seem to be the best way to do this. And somebody asked a question in one of their sessions, could we, instead of spending millions of dollars on technology for a solution that might work or might not work, instead ask people to be a little more precise about their language? And the answer turned out to be, yeah, we'll give it a try and see how it works. So at this company, nobody is allowed to use the word tank. They must qualify the word tank within their controlled reference vocabulary of a retail tank or a wholesale tank or a boat tank or a flying tank. Again, you can see how these things work. And by doing that, they were able to identify transactions that weren't part of their actual revenue stream, their cost of goods sold stream instead, and come up with a way of getting this to work. By the way, when you start talking about tanks, you want to make sure you don't confuse them with that one or that one as well, but that's sort of a side issue on this. So let's look at how a reference data architecture might actually work. When we look at this, we can talk about getting externally sourced data coming in from the outside, saying what are the federal standards. Let's go back to our Canadian government example. What are the examples that the Canadian government needs you to maintain about gender codes? I have not heard whether the Canadian government has adopted all 73 gender codes from Facebook yet, but it's a possibility, in which case you would have that reference data being stored in a data store of record, and that you would be managing those codes. We tend to talk about them as codes rather than reference data items. This information can then be pushed out to the various systems, whether they are online transaction programs, data warehouses, or marts, or whatever, and that can then push the rest of this reference data into the rest of our data sets so that you can control this. Notice one other point I haven't mentioned. You do have a business data steward involved because you want to have somebody making sure that that is going to be occurring in the fashion according to the projects that you want it to be occurring to. I don't have that steward shown on this next diagram, but which is basically the same thing, but now we're talking master database. So we take that system of record, and once we have it, we add it to our master data management store that then updates the rest of this. Now you can see the key is we've got to go from that previous organization, which was a little bit less combobulated and a little bit more problematic, and re-architect it into this fashion. So again, it's not just buying the tool, it's getting from your existing argument into this tool. I said argument there. Getting from your existing environment into this tool so that you then have the ability to go forward and put things in the rightful place. This type of a process can be a multi-year implementation piece. It's not easy work. This has been one of the challenges that organizations have had as they're looking at this. Let me show you one more architecture slide here, and then we'll move on to some of the challenges that we have on this. Again, the idea here is that we're simply maintaining the master data in a hub with a data cleansing layer around it, and we've combined both the reference and the master data in the same piece. None of these are the right answer for your organization. These are suggestions that may work. You should think about them as alternatives, and in any design exercise, compare two alternatives at least in order to come up with your final judgment on where this should be. By the way, the word design actually means exactly that. We are taking at least two alternatives and comparing them. I could do this, yes, or I could do right-handed, or I could do it left-handed. Well, being a right-handed person, I'm probably going to err on the side of my more competent digits, but anyway, we'll try that. So fairly problematic on this. This is large and complicated technology. And so what happens with their programs over time, many people are not satisfied with what's happened. They've tried this. They've tried a simplistic solution by buying things, but it does not actually give you the solutions that you want by magically installing a technology. Again, people, process, and technologies are the way to get this. So when you look at numbers like the second one from the bottom there, 64% are planning to re-architect their reference data. You know, I'd like to do that one time and get it right. Having to do it twice is really not a good idea, and it doesn't speak well to the organization's ability to implement some of these large technology projects. Again, 99% there, 70%, 25% have wasted time on this. Again, I gave you all those numbers here. Let's look at another set. 30% of the MDM programs are regarded outright as failures. Many of these have been associated with something called service architectures, which are very, very nice, but again have had some problems. So again, the service architectures is where you're building little pieces of software to go in and provide customer information or the bits about delivering the master data around to the organization. The main key of this is the causes of failure. 80% of them fail because of leadership. They're not estimating the magnitudes that they have to deal with or inability to change with the culture on this. Many of the MDMs were implemented as a technology or as a project. Many times the MDM is an enterprise data warehouse or seen as an enterprise resource planning program like a PeopleSoft or an SAP. Again, it's not, they are different. The MDM was implemented largely as an IT project. It's been separated from data governance and quality or implemented without those two associated pillars. Many of them are implemented with inappropriate technology. There are all sorts of internal politics and a siloed mentality because, of course, if you're doing MDM, you're really dealing with enterprise-wide initiatives. Now, let me give you a bit of context here in terms of how we'd like to see these things built. If you think about it, when you go out to acquire MDM capabilities, I've already told you it's a multi-year journey. Rather than simply saying, good, let's go talk to the MDM vendors, of which there are a lot, and the software works, they're very fine people, but it's kind of like trying to talk to a 16-year-old about driving in the weather that we're experiencing here in the Northeast. Anybody who's 16 who has never driven on snow and ice in a blizzard with rain and snow and sleet falling around them, and worse still, crazy other drivers on the road, is not going to be able to relate to the lessons that you're trying to give to them. So what do we do with our kids? We take them, and we drive them to the school parking lot. Hopefully the school is not in session, and we drive around and we teach them how to steer into a skid. We teach them how to brake by pumping the brakes. We teach them about how the difference between anti-lock brakes and regular brakes are and how that's going to impact your driving. We teach them about the difference between driving a front-wheel drive car and a rear-wheel drive car versus an all-wheel drive car, and they learn. But luckily, it doesn't take most kids years to learn, but it does take most organizations at least a year to become familiar enough with MDM that they will be able to actually have a good conversation with the vendors. Again, the vendors are specialists in this area. They know exactly what they're doing, and they can answer any question for you, but you might not understand their question in context. So our advice to organizations is to, when you're starting with MDM, build one of these yourself. Everybody has at least one copy of Microsoft SQL Server. Forgive me, it's almost the most ubiquitous database in the world that's out there. And you can build your own MDM stack. Now, remember, Microsoft also sells an MDM solution, but I am recommending that you not buy that MDM solution from Microsoft or any other vendor the first year. Instead, build your own capabilities for master data management for 1 or 2, maybe 3 master data items. Again, maybe the locations of all of your facilities, maybe the list of your employees if it's a reasonable number, maybe the catalog of your products. But by building this and working with this in a programmable fashion, you will learn as an organization so much about MDM issues that you will then be at the end of a year ready to have a good conversation with the vendors. But if you have that conversation before you've gained that experience, it's kind of like handing somebody a textbook on how to run Oracle and then expecting them to actually be able to be an Oracle DBA. Yes, they may be able to pass the test, but in terms of actually understanding how it works, no, they're not going to be useful at that process. One of the most important aspects of master data management solution is making sure that your master data management solution complements your existing business process architecture. Now, your business process architecture, we find only that 1 in 10 organizations actually understands and maintains business process architectures. If you're in one of those companies already, tune out for the next 2 minutes of the conversation here. But most organizations don't. And the other major cause of MDM failure is a mismatch between what the MDM is producing in terms of data and how that fits relative to the organization's process. So how do you go about figuring out what your existing process architecture is if you're one of the 90% of the organizations that doesn't do this? There are tools out there. This is one called from QPR that I've used a couple times, very, very nice. Basically what it does is reads the log files from your ERP or whatever systems you point it to, and it looks at transactions and groups them and can give us when different things transfer. So you remember earlier we had a order status that we were talking about. Here it's showing from reading the log files of this, it's inferring information so that it can obtain a holistic perspective on what's going on in the organization so that customers who are using this understand the inputs and the outputs and the value proposition as well, and that everybody gets a better understanding so that you can speed up the process of understanding the existing process architecture and start to gain savings and looking at specific compliance and increased output issues all the way around. And finally, you're actually documenting your systems as well, which is not sexy or exciting, but something that's a necessary piece that needs to be done all the way around. So when we talk about this, you do not need to buy an automated tool to do this. This is a fine tool, and there are lots of others that will help you with this as well, but you do need to have an understanding of the process. Let me take you to a very specific example that seems to resonate well with people. Most people are familiar with the old traditional gasoline engine. And it runs, it's powered us for 100 years, we do a great job with it, and all of the car companies, we're trying to figure out where can we go next, because we do need to get to something that is post-gasoline and all this. And Toyota were the first people to come up with this, where they have the Prius hybrid engine, What that means is in most of the hybrids, you now have two engines in the front of the car. There's an electric motor on the bottom and an engine on the top. And what they tried to do was replace the engine with the electric motor. Well, that was working at the wrong level of granularity. It's a perfect example of a process mismatch that doesn't work. I'm going to show you a little movie on this. And what you see happening here is somebody who's, first of all, pressing the accelerator with their foot in the lower left-hand corner. When they do, you'll notice the battery is being run. When you push it faster, however, then the engine kicks in. Or we do something else in terms of our driving, and maybe both engines will kick in. The key to this invention was the insight that you shouldn't be trying to replace today a gasoline engine with an electric engine, but the question should be instead, how can we get the gas engine to work in a complementary fashion to the electric motor? And this match was the key that Toyota pioneered and that everybody else has now copied in order to do this. I have to say this is a terrible example of a Prius. You'll notice it's showing 99 miles to the gallon right now, but when you're driving it shows about 16 miles to the gallon. I get about 40 on my car. When my wife drives it, she gets about 50. So there is a driver element that occurs to it as well. Anyway, I hope what you get is that the idea master data management is critically important, as is reference data management, but more important than just buying the solution is making sure that solution works in response to your needs. And if it doesn't work in response to your needs, the system, like all technology pieces, will get ignored. Let's go a little further then and look at some specific building blocks around that. Goals and principles. What we're trying to do with master data and reference data management is provide authoritative golden master sources of reconciled, high-quality master and reference data. We're trying to lower the cost and complexity of our organizational operations through reuse and leverage of standards and support the various business intelligence and information integration efforts that are working in the organization. If we don't have authoritative sources, you may have data in the master data management solution, but that people don't use it because people say, oh, the data in that system is all wrong. By the way, I'll tell a quick little story about a good friend, Melanie, who's done this. This is not Melanie who's going to do the one in May, but another Melanie across town here. She got a hold of a data set, and somebody said the data set sucks, and she said, well, can you define what sucks is? And they said, actually, no. We're always told it sucked. So she did an analysis of it and found out that it was 98% accurate. And said, oh, this is 98% accurate data, not sucky data. Again, if you've got the ability to do this, it can make them an easy answer to the question of where do I get data about people, processes, right, technology, locations, things, whatever it is we're trying to do. And when people go in to support these with BI type of efforts as well, it becomes much easier to train them because there's only one particular area. So what we're trying to do here with all of this is understand the needs of the organization, identify the specific contributors, maintain an existing architecture for this integration, implement the various solutions. And again, my advice to everybody is to build your own for a year, plan to build your own for a year as a learning experience for the organization. Then let's get into setting some specific rules. You'll be in a better position to talk to the vendors about the rule engines that they have, establish some golden records, which are the best sources of that information, and then start to talk about specific hierarchies. Again, hierarchies lead typically to taxonomies. You don't have to go that far, but it's a very good way to establish that. If you want to see a group that's done a great job of looking at this, think back over Amazon search over the past 10 years. Amazon search 10 years ago sucked on their website. They have gotten much, much better at this, and the reason is because they've done an excellent job of making sure that their reference and master data works very well in an integrated environment. Again, duplicate and distribute this so that it can be accessible to people. It is okay to put master and reference data on a phone, a tablet if you need to, because people don't have access to the internet all the time, but you need to have a regular update and refresh cycle in order to do this. And then make sure you have a process for going through this. So when we're looking at a specific investigation, we want to find out who is it that's going to need this information? Because if we don't know who needs it, we can't possibly do a good job of it. And what data exists from the existing sources? So we're back to our old reverse engineering and then forward engineering the stuff, our standard analysis techniques that we look at all the time. We do want to compare what's different about each of the data sources, because some of those sources may have good reasons for keeping, and what we have to define is, do we want the union or the intersection of all of these master data sets that we're putting together, which gets us back to governance. How are you going to have somebody who's just a DBA? And I'm not taking anything away from DBAs, but DBAs know their area. They may not know the other areas that are trying to compete with them, or not compete, sorry, cooperate with them in that. So you've got this idea here again of the ability to say, how do these data sources differ? And what sort of inconsistencies do we have within there? Should we reconcile them, and how do we share the various values that are around this? Now, when you're proposing how these deliver, what you need to look at specifically is, the data is almost never in the shape that you want it to be in, so you're going to have some way of cleansing the data. I've got a couple of great case studies that I'll be presenting at EDW in my data strategy seminar that we're going to do on Monday afternoon, but that talk specifically about how to value those cleansing activities. You're also going to understand that your organization's master and reference data requirements are going to be similar to other organizations and different from other organizations. Again, the stuff that some groups do is very different from the stuff that other groups do. The only way to do that properly is with data models and documentation. If you have no data modeling tools to be able to do this, you will not be able to do a good job with master and reference data. You're going to make sure that you have some reliable information in there, that your golden record has some sort of lineage so that you can track the changes that are made over time. And it's always a good idea to have some metrics and reporting around this process as well, so that you can show the useful results that you have in the organizations. I've got several case studies that I have where we've looked specifically at an organization and said this process of implementing this type of system saves the organization millions of dollars. And that's a good thing if you can show that. However, if you just put it in and you don't take any measures, people aren't going to be able to give you credit for the stuff that you do. Let's look at the roles and responsibilities around master and reference data. You're, of course, going to have a steering committee with some associated stewards that are involved in this. You're going to have some subject matter experts, the SMEs as we call them, to get the information out. The nice part about this is, though, for at least the master data that you're working with, you can tell the SMEs this is the last meeting that they have to come to, because if they get this stuff right and the organization implements it, the expertise that was formerly only in their head is now replicated in some technology somewhere and can be maintained on a programmatic basis. Then we've got the data consumers, of course, who are going to be using it. It's a good idea to take a look at the various standards organizations that are out there so that we understand where we can get things. Right now, it is standard to put a 4-digit year. We've pretty much determined that it's unlikely things will be around in the year 9999 that we're using today. It could be wrong, but they've decided that that's an okay way to do it. And finally, who are the data providers that you're getting from? Oops, I put both of those up at once, but we'll go ahead anyway. Consumers, okay, are going to be, in many cases, applications. So the consumer of a master data item is going to be another application. Maybe the people who use that application will get involved, but really you have to look at it from an application perspective. Similarly, there's going to be BI and reporting users, the various application developers and architects, integration from a data perspective, BI vendors, partners and customers, And we're going to have some people who are participating in this, the stewards, the subject matter experts, the architects, the analysts, the application architects, whatever your data governance organization is, and things along those lines. Now, let me make a point on this one. When you're doing this, you're going to be analyzing what's happening to the internal processing of the organization. In many instances in an MDM environment, there is all sorts of savings that accrue from people looking at systems and saying, oh my goodness, it's complicated for some historical reason. But this actually offers us an excellent opportunity to go out and simplify the entire process. And by simplifying it, we have removed entire classes, entire systems, hundreds of millions of lines of code in order to do this. We're just simply saying if people step back and look and say, oh, I used to put things in the top, and the thing that came out the bottom was that we had more precision on it, it may not take 6 systems and 48 million lines of code in order to implement this, that we can actually go very, very much into a better, cleaner systems design from this, which has been the promise of SOA all along as well. There are lots of tools that we are going to use in this context, extract, transform, and load tools that are relative to the data warehouse. As I mentioned before, there's lots of reference master data applications that we have out there. Your data modeling tools can now be available in mostly open source format. So I know that the Irwins of the world and the ER studios of the world and all would rather have you buy their tools, and they are fine tools and not taking any judgment on them, but you don't have to actually get permission. You can go out there and download your own set of tools to get started with to determine then whether, and make the case for whether these tools are in fact something that your organization should be investing in. I mentioned process architecture as well. Of course you're going to need to have a process modeling component of this, as well as metadata repositories. I got to remember to remove the hyphen from that. We don't use the hyphen anymore in that one. If you haven't heard of them, data profiling tools are a tremendous productivity balance that helps you with the data quality and the loading of these MDM and reference tools. They do a great job of giving you a much higher perspective of what's happening at the tools that you could get from simply SQL querying, excuse me. Also data integration tools, data cleansing tools, the business process, the rules, engines that are there. And none of this is going to work unless you put into place the basic change management discipline. All right, so we're headed back towards the top of the hour. Just got a couple more topics to go over with you. And the idea here is let's talk specifically about what we've learned from implementing many years of master data practices around this. The first one is that this belongs to the organization. It can't reside solely in IT. It will not succeed. The business is the only part of the organization that's going to understand the process architecture, unless it's a very rare IT shop. There are a few, but much fewer do not understand that. And that this is a program. They're not going to be doing one project, and you will not be done with the MDM project. Now, here's where it gets really problematic, though, because most organizations say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go buy an MDM solution because it seems like it's a good place to go, and I'm not doing it right now, so things must be able to get better. But again, if they go out and buy this product and install it as a technology projects have a 1/3 chance of succeeding on time with full functionality according to the original schedule that they are developed. So 2/3 of the projects do not work, and therefore people talk about it, and it becomes a source of contention, and nobody's really looking at the benefits around this. So again, it's a program, and it's an ongoing program. It's not a simple project, and you're not done with it. You may be done with the installation of the software, but if that's the only thing that you're focusing on, there's no way that your master data management or reference data can be successful. The stewards have to be trained. They have to understand what's going on. And I'll be doing a governance tutorial at the event after EDW, which is the data governance conference that we have out in San Diego after that. So look forward to seeing everybody on that one as well. We want to make sure then that the golden values represent the best sources and that we replicate these things only from the master data. Because if we do it the other way around, we'll have big problems. Again, it doesn't do any good to have a master data solution if people can still get the data from somebody's spreadsheet that may or may not have the correct values in it. And finally, of course, we've said this a couple of times, you need to have a formal change management process in place in order to actually get this to work. So what works well? Again, as usual, the executive sponsorship is crucial to this because they're the ones that are going to give you enough time, I'm going to say 3 years on average, to do a good job of implementing this. It doesn't mean that it's going to be 3 years until there's any benefits that accrue from it, but there are going to be multiple years involved in the process. Make sure that your business owns the data, that it is not strictly an IT project again in order to do that, that you have strong project management and organizational change in place, that you use a holistic approach combining the people, process, technologies, and information that we talk about as well, and build your process to be ongoing and repeatable, supporting continuous improvement so that periodically you get together with others in the organization and say, how can we even more improve the quality of our master data around this information? I've got lots and lots of companies that I have relationships with, and many of them maintain the information in very careful fashion. And I have other companies that think I own a time-sharing condo with my brother, which I've never bought one, and he never has either. So they're annoying. Management needs to recognize the importance of dedicating a team to this process. And this team doesn't do just MDM, but it is a great focus for many organizations, particularly if you don't have it as well. Look at it as a learning experience. Understand how your hub model works and how it integrates with your internal and external sources and consumers of data. Resist the urge to customize any of these products. It's much easier. They really do know an awful lot about the core practices in most of these areas. So it is absolutely not a good idea to go in and do customization work around this because master data management is so fundamental to the organization. We've seen a couple companies do it, and almost always they make a mess out of it. Stay up to date, of course, with the patches on it, and you got to pay people to break it. The only way you're going to make sure this actually works for your organization is if you say, well, let me just take the opposite approach. If you turn on the new system and say, everybody check it out and see how it goes, they all say, oh, it looks fine to me, right? And you think, good, I'm done. Send the vendors on their way, the consultants home, everybody goes back to a thing and get it to work again. No, that's not the way to do it. If, on the other hand, you incentivize people to test your system and break it and reward them for finding ways in which it doesn't work, you will find ways in which it doesn't work. So a much better way to be proactive on the entire process and making sure that it's going to work. So let's go to a couple of quick takeaways, and we're almost at the top of the hour, and we will get back into the Q&A section here after just this one last section. Success is more likely and more frequently observed once users understand the strengths and limitations of MDM. MDM is not going to fix all your data problems. It's an underlying technology that provides a great starting place for fixing your data problems. But if you tell people that the MDM will fix the problems, they will think that once you've installed that master data management software, they don't have to do anything else and everything should be magic. It would be nice if it was, but it's not true. Take small steps. Do this ramp-up process that I described to you about building your own system and then using it for a year before you go out and have any conversations at all with the vendors that are in this area. You will benefit immensely in the long run. Make sure that you pay attention to expectations management. Again, I've already said, if you tell people that I'm going to put it in an MDM and it's going to solve all our data problems, that won't work. You're going to have an architect involved. If you have no qualified architect in there, it is going to be a big problem. You need a governance framework that makes sure that individual master data can be managed in a very, very careful fashion. It should be driven by the big overriding strategy that is going to be done. If you don't use the strategic framework to evaluate all of your various pieces, you will end up with an absolute mess. You've got to gain high-level understanding and buy-in from the organizations, which means sitting down with executives and explaining to them spending $1 million on an MDM solution will likely not buy us anything, but spending $2 million on an MDM program, including training, all the rest of the pieces that go into it, will likely start to result in improvements. Again, they separate the technology, which is not going to be anything magic for them to do this. Get a vision for it and make sure that that vision complements the organization's vision. Go back to strategy on that. Use a measures hierarchy to communicate the standards for success and then objectively measure the progress. Unfortunately, too many organizations that I work with can make the following statement: all of our data is of unknown quality. That's a scary thing, and yet it's true in very many organizations. So use the measures that you pull out of an MDM project in order to actually come up with objective measures of progress. Make sure that you use a business case development so that there's some storytelling involved. It's the most powerful way of communicating with executives and users. Get the business to tell you what should be done in terms of the KPIs. What are the important things in there? Let them articulate what they would see as success. Measure the system before and after to determine the amounts of the change. Translate the metrics into financial results. So some area that we've had a lot of success in. I have a book out there called Monetizing, which speaks directly to this proposition. And finally, the business and the IT organization should be working together to come up with a single version of this. Now, I want you to turn your speakers down a little bit because I'm going to play you a little loud piece. But I just want to show you here at the top one little example of how one company decided to articulate their MDM solution. Whoops, I blew that one. Let's try it again. There we go. So we went 1 minute over the hour. Shannon, I apologize for that, but that is a really wonderful articulation that British Telecom told me I could use. They did a great job of illustrating how that worked for their organization. If you'd like a copy of that, we'll be happy to send you one on that. And it's now time to talk about Q&As. So Shannon, what do we have?
As we have a lot of questions coming in, and just to answer some of the most popular questions that we received, just a reminder, I will be sending a follow-up email by end of day Thursday to all registrants with links to the slides and the recording of this session. Some great questions already coming in, so keep them coming in the Q&A section. So Peter, is a master data a subset of reference data? The definition of reference data sounds like it could apply to master data. I often get confused how to logically draw the line between them.
Great question. Let me go back to the definitional chunk in here. Technically, reference data is a subset of master data. So the way to think about it here, sorry, wrong slide, there we go, is that on this slide here, when we're looking at the values 1 through 9, those are the allowable values for gender code for this particular organization. Again, remember this is Canadian, and Canadian law said that you had to maintain at least these 9 gender codes. So reference data is the fact that you have codes that your gender can either be male, female, formerly male, now female, formerly female, now male, uncertain, won't tell, doesn't know, or male soon to be female or female soon to be male. So those are the reference data pieces. The master data then is a larger category, which is still control over all those values. But in this case, we need to now know that the customer Pat has this specific gender code. So I hope that helps. It's a great question to clarify.
Indeed. And so, you know, moving on, current MDM approaches the situation from a silo viewpoint and it is data-driven. Example, supplier, customer, and product silo delivery. MDM is moving towards MDM in context of business case. Example, end-to-end thinking, life cycle, supplier, customer, and product. You want to expand on that?
So that's a great observation. This does represent a maturing in the thinking of the field. Many organizations have large amounts of complexity. And let me just deviate here for a quick little bit. People look at data science and go, well, the data scientists can do this really, really effectively. Why can't we? And the answer is because of the legacy that's associated with your existing systems. Your legacy system doesn't tend to look like this. It looks actually much more like this. It's a confusing sense of cow paths that have been paved over the time, and that while that paving the cow paths will provide you some business value, it also makes for a very complex legacy processing environment. So one of the ways of doing this is, instead of going to a gigantic master data management hub that does it for the entire organization, instead look at localizing these hubs in a little bit better. So for example, for this slide, you could have a master data management hub in 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5 of these specific subject areas, and that is a perfectly good solution. In many cases, it's shown to be actually more popular and more advantageous to organizations when they're faced with specific environmental complexity that may not be amenable to that large process. Or management may say, you know, the average organization may take 3 years to get there. With us, we're a little bit worse, so maybe it's 5 years, and they say, no, we need results sooner than that. So this is a way of getting to those results sooner. It's a great question. Thanks for it.
So is it necessary to purchase a tool, or is it just as feasible and reasonable, given proper investments, that an organization can build their own hub processes and standards?
So the theory behind service-oriented architecture was, in fact, that it was cheaper to do that. If the organization is good, there's no reason why it can't do exactly what you've asked about. However, most organizations aren't quite that good. So the recommendation is generally to at least check out what the offerings from the vendors are. And you know, if you come to Enterprise Data World, we have an entire room full of these kind of folks that are just looking to have these conversations with you. But I did also say that it is important for most organizations to try this on their own before having that conversation. Try it yourself, though. Come to Enterprise Data World this year, have some conversations with people about MDM, and you'll learn some information. Go home, build a small, limited functioning hub. We're not building the entire MDM solution for the organization, but we can at least build a hub for part of the organization or for a aspect of master data. I mean, again, if you've got 1 billion customers, don't try to put them all out there. But if you've got 70, 80, 100 locations, that's a great place to try this. We're working on one of those with a healthcare company right now, and they're doing exactly this process. The idea is that by building it yourself and doing some research, when you come back to Enterprise Data World next year, you will have a very different set of conversations with the vendors. So if you're really good, yes, you can build your hub, but the reason these products exist is because they provide excellent value. I'm just trying to help reduce the steep learning curve that is associated with buying one of these things and putting it in and not having it well understood by the organizational environment. Again, great question. Thanks.
And of course, I love all the Enterprise Data World, otherwise known as EDW references, where of course they can meet you in person because you are giving a couple of talks.
And Shannon and I agreed that we were going to cross-dress on this one too, so.
Or sing.
Says, wait a minute, I agreed to that? No, we'll be there having fun, that's the point.
So we do have fun, though, if you can't tell. So moving on to the questions here. Does master data management imply that all instances of the master data align with the master names and enumerations within the locations in which they reside? Or does the strategy simply require mapping the variations to the preferred mastered format?
So that is a really fine question, because what the questioner is asking specifically is it good enough to know where these things are connectable, or do I have to actually make them physically connectable in order to do that? And the answer is that's up to your organization. Okay. I've worked with a lot of organizations that the data sets are so vast, there's not a chance that they will ever connect or finish connecting all of the various data points that are out there. But they have done exactly the mapping as the questioner asked, and when they ask a question, they have a little lookup system that they can go and verify and say, yep, this is the thing we thought we were talking about, let's move on with our analysis. So again, I hope I'm not telling you don't do the actual work, just get the mapping done. But in some instances, that is good enough for the business mission. You guys, as the expert data managers that you are better positioned to tell your organization, to advise your organization on the answer to that question. Again, wonderful questions.
Agreed. And I love this one coming out here. So once we have a perfect data model, I would love one of those, please, and have all fact and dimension data to be used. Can't dimension data be rearranged as master data? What else will we be missing here?
So not that that's the only thing that you can do, but what you have done by coming up with a series of dimensions around some sort of a warehousing solution is that you've defined a set of business needs for the organization and a way of satisfying those business needs. So you may have telephones and then different types of telephones that are waterproof and telephones that are small and telephones that are cheap, right? And you know, whatever that taxonomy is that you've organized in there, that is a phenomenal piece of work. Anything that you do to organize your data is probably useful in an MDM context. I only mentioned it briefly in here. I think I said something about hierarchies, which is exactly what the question was asking about with those dimensions. Those dimensions can be helpful, and if people find them useful and use them, that's great. The way I like to do that kind of a project is that I go into the organization and I say, who are the people who you couldn't possibly spare to have on this particular project? And they'll give me names of, you know, Frida and Frank and Joe and, you know, whatever. And I'll say, great, those are the people we need to have on this project. By the way, I stole that entire piece there from Michael Gorman. Michael, thank you for that wonderful piece of advice, because those are the people that understand and did the work to come up with the dimensions, and they know that those dimensions are useful to the business. They were done based on good, solid analysis. So absolutely, you probably have lots of efforts like that in your organization going on that will help get you down the road. And now, this is a great example of one of those conversations. So if you were to say to the master data management vendor, does our blah, blah hierarchy work with your tool? The vendor's not going to know that. But if you've worked with your own version of implementing that, what you can say to the vendor is, if I need to repeat a hierarchy that has repeating groups in it, can your tool do that? Now that's a question the vendor can answer. But you wouldn't know to even ask that question until you had gone through your little experiment in the first place. Fantastic questions.
Indeed, I love it. One of the challenges with MDM solutions is that the probabilistic matching may lead to change in entities' IDs or master golden record that has impacted on downstream consumers. How are organizations dealing with these challenges? Boy, I get tongue-tied on that one.
I think you did a great job, though. It's like a PhD level question, Shannon. So one of our colleagues that will be at EDW typically is a fellow named John Talbert, who's probably done more in the area of probabilistic entity matching than anybody else that I know of. Lots and lots of tools that do this. He's actually helped companies develop the tools, so that's why he's a super resource on that. What they're talking about probabilistically is the thing that I alluded to with my little grumble at some of the vendors that don't know me very well. I've never owned a timeshare. My brother has never owned a timeshare. And yet the most frequent telephone call that we get, even though we're both on the do not call list, is, hey, we can help you get rid of that timeshare. Now, what they're doing there is that they've come up with a probabilistic matching based on me versus somebody else. There are at least two other Peter Akins that I know about. One of them is a writer of computer books at Duke University, and I forget where I found the third one. Oh, he's the promoter in Ireland that promotes all the big rock bands over there. He's one I could be, right? That'd be a fun one. they may be getting us confused with those other individuals based on that probabilistic matching. And the question was about, okay, so they go ahead and they put me out there in a master data management solution as an owner of a timeshare. Well, the effect on that, at least for me as a consumer, is you guys are a pain in the rear because I don't get very many calls on my home phone, and most of those are sales calls trying to do me something that I don't have any interest in doing, which is selling something that I don't actually own. It is a problem. So when you do probabilistic matching, one of the things that we've worked on with various organizations is a color code strategy, so that when pieces of information are displayed on a Tableau dashboard, you actually have a little bit of ability to say, oh, that person's name is in yellow instead of straight black and white. That means that we don't really know for sure that Peter owns a timeshare. We think that Peter owns a timeshare. And that's how you can start to incorporate some more of this uncertainty into your process. Again, I may buy a timeshare at some point. I think it's unlikely, but very, very not able to do it. But if you go in and say, oh no, this is definitely Peter because he's got a probability, 70% probability that he owns a timeshare, well, that may be just because people with, gray hair who ride horses own timeshares, right? I'm making a spurious connection there. Who also play bass there, Shannon. We'll throw the musical part in there as well. And so those people do it, so probably Peter owns a timeshare, right? I'm one of those weird people who plays music, rides horses, and has gray hair, but doesn't own a timeshare, so it has an impact further down the road. Again, great question. It's really understanding the whole system, and that's why I said the process architecture was so important, because if you have a good process architecture, somebody will ask the question, hopefully, as you're planning the system, not after you've implemented, what if we get the probability matching wrong and we feed a whole bunch of people into a decision engine that starts bombarding them with questions and propaganda and stuff like that, trying to get them to buy something that they either already own or have no intention of buying in the first place. And that's, by the way, a very innocuous component of this. Think about it from another perspective, which is profiling, right? That can be extremely harmful. Again, great question.
Yeah, there's just a ton of great questions coming in. We've got another one that's come in. MDM has multiple architectural approaches. Data virtualization, semantic, and machine learning are complicating a digital environment. So which one of MDM architectural topology do you suggest? Centralized, registry, federated?
So I'm going to give you the standard consultant answer, which is that it depends. There are advantages and disadvantages to each, which is why, again, I urge you to try it on your own as opposed to buying one of each of those three different architectural approaches. If you're in a large distributed real-time environment, we'll say like the Department of Homeland Security, certainly one architecture would suggest itself above the other two. On the other hand, having a single point of failure for a small or medium-sized business may not be actually a problem, as long as Amazon doesn't get hacked and the bad guys keep the internet running on that. So I can't tell you of those what is good. The only question that is relevant is what is your expertise to bring information to that decision so that the organization will buy, when it does buy, the solution that is appropriate for where the organization is on its journey and that meets its business needs. It's a great question. If we had another hour, I could go into each of those models and talk about them, and maybe that's something we ought to do, Shannon, would be an advanced MDM talk around one of these things.
Yeah, that is a great idea. We actually haven't covered that before, and I don't see any more questions from the attendees, but my own question, do you think, in terms of interest from the community, we saw a lull for a while in terms of MDM. Do you think these but we're seeing it pick back up in terms of being interest type again. Do you think it's because of the new technologies and people are trying to figure out how to associate all of this with their MDM solutions?
I think it's partly that. I think it's also that nobody still has a good handle on how to tame the data explosion anyway, and that people really, really do want to understand some of the big questions. I was out in Kansas City last week, and the movie chain, AMC, is actually investing in some very significant data management capabilities. So they're going to bring this to the movies. Now, I don't know whether that means they're going to make the movies more targeted to me. I don't think movie theaters have much input into what the studios produce. I'm going to guess it's more along the lines of lifestyle kinds of things that they're looking to do in there and to try and find out, because most of the studio business went to, most of the movie business went to Fandango, and that was interesting, but Fandango really wasn't, they're really more of a broker than anything else, and the movie theaters are kind of going, we should have paid attention to that, and I'm going to guess, I have no inside knowledge, but I'm going to guess that that's what AMC is doing, is going back in there and trying to learn more about their customer habits so that they can make the movie experience more delightful for the people that they're trying to impress in that area. Everybody's dealing with this data explosion, Shannon. I don't know that we're making good headway on all of it, but we're giving it our best, and that's one of the reasons we all get together periodically to try and see how it's going.
It keeps us busy, that's for sure. Well, that's all of the questions that we've got coming in for the day. Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation. So enjoy it. And thank you to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do and for the great questions that have come in today. We hope that you will join us again in April for another presentation. Yeah, we're doing data modeling strategies.
And I get you a couple references in here as well so that you guys can do some more research on your own, taking a look at how that all works out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And just a reminder again, I'll get all this information, the slides, the recording out by end of day Thursday.
Super.
All right. Well, have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, get out of the weather, right?
Indeed.